Welcome to the bucket courses. Everything you want to know before you kick the bucket. We're glad to see you all here today, and I know that you will be glad that you came. My name is Joanne Britton. Here are some things that you need to know before we start. Please silence your cell phones. Turn on your tea coil if you have one. If there is discussion or time for questions, we will come around with the microphones. If you are able, at the end of the morning, please put your chair up after the program on the dollies provided. And now for the main event. Jim Kessler has devoted his professional life to education, teaching biology at Newton High School for 33 years, and environmental biology and introductory biology at Iowa Valley Community College for 12 years. He recognizes the importance of native plant habitats to our environment and promotes this idea in presentations and workshops all over the country. He and his wife, Kathy, have restored 30 acres of their property to native habitat, including prairie, wetlands, woodlands, and savannas, and they have donated 27 acres of their restored habitats to the Burr Oak Land Trust for perpetual preservation. And Effie Hall is retired from Grinnell College and became interested in native plants when she took a course by Jim Kessler on creating a pollinator garden. This led to the Iowa State Master Gardener program and the addition of beautiful native plants in her garden. Please join me in welcoming Jim Kessler and Effie Hall.
Yeah, I am speaking again next week. That will be an entirely different presentation. It will be entitled The Green Yard Makeover, which is a program that I developed with Jordan Scheibel, and we did a number of workshops together, and he isn't able to participate in that tomorrow, but I want to give him credit for that. It's exciting to be here. Actually, the Burr Oak Land Trust AmeriCorps Corps is out at our property right now doing some preparation for burning in the woodland, and they'll be hauling some brush out of the woodland. That has been a tremendous arrangement, and they help us a lot with the restoration of the property. Which has been we donated it to them several years in 2017. It's great to be here. I see a lot of familiar faces, and I did give this particular program at the Mayflower fairly recently, but as I said, the next program next week will be entirely different. It will be basically about how to do what Effie is doing, specifically about the kinds of plants that you can put in the yard and so on. I realize that a lot of you may not have, you may not have a yard to work with. Hopefully you will send some of this information to your relatives and friends and encourage them to plant natives. We need a lot of evangelists for this, and you can be those people. You know a lot of people, and people respect people with wisdom, and you are those folks. So let's get started. Okay. My journey to this moment began in 1970 at UNI, close to the first Earth Day, when I was a grad student in biology. I read a Sierra Club book entitled A Moment in the Sun. It detailed the horrible environmental crisis of that time, and that new awareness changed the direction of my life. Later in 1972, when I had started my career as a biology teacher at Newton High School, the county naturalist drove me to a virgin prairie on a steep hillside, which was actually across from the Reicheld area on Highway 6. It was the most diverse and beautiful natural area I'd ever seen. A year later, it was sold, plowed, planted to corn, and later put in the Conservation Reserve Program. Often as we drove past that spot on our way to Grinnell Friends Church, Kathy and I deeply grieved its loss. We talked about eventually buying land near our church in Grinnell and restoring it into native habitat. I later planted a backyard wildflower garden in the mid-1970s when virtually no one else was doing that, and began to manage the Newton High School prairie. This picture of Kathy and I was taken for our 50th anniversary shortly before the COVID shutdown. In 1998, we purchased 30 acres south of Grinnell, and the realization of our dream began. The restoration process has contributed more than you can imagine to the mental, physical, and spiritual health of our family. We've always viewed restoring a piece of God's creation as an important part of our Christian faith. Now, the pictures of our grandchildren were taken, up to 10 years ago. They actually, the one on the right has been married for about a year, and she graduated from Grandview University. She's a nurse in Des Moines. The middle one is married, and girl's married and graduated. Will graduate from Grandview University this spring in May, and the youngest is a sophomore in high school. And the other is our son, Paul, who lives in Grinnell and teaches at North Mahaska. This picture shows our oldest son and our 3 granddaughters spreading prairie seed. After graduate school in economic development at a college near Philadelphia, Paul started work at a nonprofit nearby. The computer setup there was really terrible, and he developed severe tendonitis in both arms. Eventually, he had to come home, and he lived with us and was unable to work for a while. The rehabilitation process took years. Paul began to explore the natural areas within a 35-mile radius of our property. He became very expert at finding native prairie plants and collecting their seeds. His mental, physical, and spiritual healing began with medical help, by helping with the church youth group, and by working on our property. There are now over 270 local native species on the property, in large part because of Paul's seed collecting work and expertise. Today, Paul teaches high school biology and environmental science at North Mahaska High School. What a mess. This is a picture of the east 10 acres of an old crop field planted with brome grass in 1998 when we purchased the property. The west 10 acres included an old weedy bluegrass pasture, degraded oak savannas and wetlands, and a creek. The southernmost 10 acres consisted of an almost impassable oak hickory timber clogged with downed wood and shade-loving trees. We first had to clear the area of dead vegetation and living plants to prepare for seeding. We seeded our prairies by hand using rows of wire flags to mark seeding aisles. A first-year seeding is always a weedy mess. Patience is the only answer. Restoration of habitats is a long distance event, not a sprint. Although there are restored woodland, wetland, and native habitats on the property, I will focus on the restoration to illustrate how biodiversity has increased and how the mental, physical, and spiritual health of our family has been impacted positively. We started controlled burns as soon as there was enough fuel to do that. Now, this is that front field that I showed you that was a mess before. Yeah, 15 to 20 years into succession, after the original seeding, a mature prairie is present here with close to 60 species of native wildflowers and grasses. Pale purple coneflower, white flowering spurge, and yellow prairie coreopsis are blooming in this picture. In 2017, we donated the 26 acres of the property, the Burr Oak Land Trust in Iowa City. The trust sends our AmeriCorps crews frequently to help us with prescribed burns and restoration projects. Our home sits on 2 acres that we still own in the middle of the Kessler Prairie property. It's like living in a very high quality state park that's highly managed and incredibly beautiful. Restoring biodiversity. We'll look at a few of the spring prairie wildflowers that are present. Here is prairie violet, and most of these pictures somebody in the family took. Prairie violet, golden alexander. This is the wild plum thicket that was there when we arrived on the property, in bloom in the spring. White wild indigo, shooting star, and yes, Ohio spiderwort's pretty incredible. The bloom is pretty incredible. It's beautiful. We'll look now at some of the prairie wildflowers in the summer. Purple flowers are ironweeds, light colored flowers are wild bergamots, and the yellow flowers are oxeyes. Here are some of the wildflowers that we see in the summertime. Pale purple coneflowers, pale yellow coneflowers, purple prairie clover, Culver's root, butterfly milkweed, and blazing star and oxeye. The grasses and other wildflowers come in, start blooming in the fall. There's one of them, rosinweed, stiff goldenrod, west of our house, showy goldenrod with a monarch on it, big blue stem, Indian grass, smooth blue aster, and late in fall, New England aster. One of the reasons that I started giving talks and have done so over 120 times in the last 12 years on Zoom and in person in Iowa and across the country is the pollinator crisis. It's a pretty big deal. We've lost, what I read recently, about 75% of the weight of insects around the world, and Iowa is no exception to that. Insect population numbers are in rapid decline. Scientists have called this an insect apocalypse. Honeybee and native bee populations are declining in part because many non-native flowers, lawn grasses, and crop fields provide no food for them, or very little food. There are 2 simple ways to reverse the rapid decline in native bee, butterfly, and other native pollinator populations. We must add lots of native plants back into our landscapes and plant them as far away from pesticide spraying as possible, which can be a challenge in Iowa. Without pollinators, nutritious fruits and vegetables, a third of our food supply would mostly disappear from our grocery produce shelves, with devastating impacts on human health and healthcare costs. I can't let that happen to my grandchildren. It's a huge problem, and it's something that can be solved. Now, if you plant natives, as we've done on our property, the pollinators will come. Here are some pictures that I've taken of some of the pollinators on our property. Here's an American bumblebee on foxglove beardtongue, a bumblebee that I can't identify on pale yellow coneflower, a black and gold bumblebee on wild bergamot, a honeybee on mountain mint, a common eastern bumblebee on showy goldenrod. And this is our front field. Actually, that's the same field that you saw that I said, what a mess, in the late fall, as the pollinators there are thousands of pollinators, and you can hear the sound from them and see them flying from plant to plant as they collect pollen and nectar to get ready for winter. Native plants produce a feast for butterflies as well. There's a red admiral butterfly on pale purple coneflower, a gray streak butterfly on oxeye, a great spangled fritillary butterfly on butterfly milkweed. The larvae of this butterfly feed on several species of native violets, including the ones that people try to get rid of in their lawns. Without those violets, this particular type of butterfly cannot exist. This is an example of how biodiversity matters to the survival of an individual species. Here's this is a viceroy butterfly, a monarch mimic on rattlesnake master, which is a really cool prairie plant as well. Now, a lot of you know Barb Briggs. She's a nature photographer and author of several children's books from Grinnell, and she goes to the church that I go to at Grinnell Friends. She took this picture of monarchs roosting in a burrow in one of our savannas. This was like 2 or 3 years ago. Paul, our son, had seeded tall purple hyssop in the savanna. During their fall migration, a huge number of monarchs discovered it, blooming, and stopped to feed on the flowers of this plant for about 10 days. It was a feast for the eyes and the soul. It was amazing. I tried to take pictures and videos of it, but they don't do justice to it. It was a boost to our mental and spiritual well-being for obvious reasons. Restoring biodiversity. Other things happen when you plant natives. Now, this wouldn't happen in a city, in a yard to this extent, but we're out in the country with a fairly large acreage. Our vertebrate wildlife appears and returns to a property. There's a gray tree frog that posed for me one day. When they're on tree bark, they're gray, and because they can change color. Anyway, this is a northern green snake, a species of concern. Several years ago, as an outdoor Easter egg hunt was winding down, one of our grandchildren discovered this northern green snake. The candy was forgotten as the tiny snake stole the show. It is an Iowa DNR species of concern, and we see them on the property every year. I did not take this picture, but during some springs we're privileged to watch wild turkeys courting in front of our windows. I hear them clucking daily. Actually, I heard wild turkeys yesterday while I was outside. Tree swallows produce many young in nest boxes annually. Actually, it's one of Kathy's bluebird boxes, and they nest in them as well. Watching bluebirds, barn swallows, and tree swallows fills us with wonder. We've often observed large swarms of swallows and dragonflies performing their amazing aerial acrobatics while watching insects over the prairies. Actually, they make the Air Force acrobatics look sick. Here's Kathy with a clutch of baby bluebirds, about 24 bluebird young fledge on the Kessler Prairie almost every year. She used to report that into the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. She hadn't been doing that lately, but Kathy's a pretty serious birder, and I'm the restoration guy, habitat restoration person in the family. Here's some goldfinches on the prairie, our state bird. We often hear the witchetty song of the yellowthroat and the lovely trilling of field sparrows on our prairies. For the first time, I saw a bobolink last summer, late in the summer, and one of the AmeriCorps kids on their Merlin app on their phone heard it recorded a rare Henslow sparrow. So possibly we have some Henslow sparrows nesting in our front prairie. We've observed a badger in our prairies, which was very exciting. We occasionally get to see young red foxes at times. And our deer hunter observed a large bobcat on the Kessler Prairie from a deer stand. Last year, and I don't know whether I give credit to the report or not, a cougar and 2 cubs were supposedly spotted in our neighborhood. Who knows? And yeah, when you're outside a lot, I used to look admiringly at nature photographers took pictures of fawns in their, that were in magazines and so on. But when you're out there all the time and you get to see things like this and take pictures. Now about the part of how this has affected our family. We've been at it for 25 years. And it has restored our minds, our bodies, and our spirits. I'm 77 years old, and I'm spoiled. My youngest son the other day said, "You know, Dad, you're as fit as most of the 50-year-olds that I know." And I do hike in the high country in Colorado every summer, and was able to do it last summer without any problem on some pretty challenging trails. And it has a lot to do with what we do on the property in terms of the work we do there. This is our oldest son, Paul, cutting stumps of woody vegetation in one of our prairie wetlands. The work here has kept Kathy and I far more physically fit than most people our age. These are our 4 grandsons, and like I said, they're about 10 years older than that now. The tallest one's a senior at Grandview University and will graduate this spring. Our grandsons and granddaughters' favorite activity was putting on high-top boots and going for a stomp in our creek. They often returned with mud from head to toe and with smiles and laughing as we hosed them down. Down tree trunks became pirate ships. I can still hear them shouting, "Arg, walk the plank, matey," and remember them rapidly trying and fighting to collect walnuts, which became their hoards of gold. Since Grinnell Friends Church is the center of our lives and relationships, it's been fun to host annual hot dog roasts for the church and for people in our area that live around us for the past 20 years. Children and adults from our church and neighborhood gather for a time of community and fellowship on the Kessler Prairie. Hay rides through the prairies, tug-of-wars, children playing, and conversations make these times very special. And you'll probably recognize some of the people here. These are some kids playing in a sandbox during that time, and some youth and young adults playing volleyball. And there's Jerry and Sarah Adams talking with Kathy. So yeah, it's a nice community time and a really super time to get together. And yeah, and kids we always have a tug of war for the kids and adults that still are up to that. Their hay rides, Tom Ogle brings his wagon and tractor. It was one of his prized Ford tractors, and gives hay rides around the property during that time. Hay rides are a way to connect children and adults to nature. We have lots of food and fellowship with friends sharing their lives together. And there's Anthony Newsma, a pastor out at Grinnell Friends Church, in the middle there, and Peter Shalmo on the left. We share the incredible beauty with community members and other people, organizations, and classes. This is a Quaker group that was attending a conference at Grinnell College a few years ago. Actually, the Berwick Land Trust will be hosting a field trip to our property sometime in, I think it's early July, early second week in July or something like that this year. Late fall in 2020, our granddaughter Natalie texted and said she wanted to get away from college for an afternoon to relax. She was an RA, resident assistant, in one of the freshman dorms, and to be renewed mentally and spiritually. She's a senior majoring in studio art at Grandview. She wanted to spend some time in our prairie, some quiet time in our prairie. Well, here she drew this sketch of our house, machine shed, prairie, and oak savanna. Natalie and her six siblings, and she's been back a bunch of times since. Natalie and her 6 siblings spent a significant amount of time on our property during their growing years, and thus it's a special place to them. Natalie and her older sister, Kaylin, had engagement and pre-wedding pictures taken in our prairies this past year. That's how much it means to them. Hoarfrost has often turned the dormant dead stalks of wildflowers and grasses into spectacular jewels almost every winter. The scripture from Psalms, "This is the day the Lord has made, this let us rejoice and be glad in," is a phrase I often repeat as I daily experience the joyfulness that I find because of the nature around us. One of my contemporary environmental heroes, Doug Ptolemy, accurately explains that native habitats, songbirds, pollinators, and wildlife cannot survive unless individuals begin to plant natives on their properties. Depending on protected areas and parks to save biodiversity is not enough, and especially in Iowa, we have the least percentage of publicly owned land in the country in terms of, yeah. Dr. Ptolemy tours the country explaining the homegrown national park concept to people. He promotes planting natives on half the yard and privately owned acreages in the U.S. This is a grassroots effort that can save biodiversity and restore essential free ecosystem services that we depend on. The biodiversity crisis is a problem that ordinary people can solve through simple actions. Ptolemy states, "Every human on this planet needs diverse, highly productive ecosystems to survive. If we can destroy habitat with blinding speed, which we obviously have done, we can also have the intelligence, knowledge, and ability to restore it. It remains to be seen whether we have the wisdom to do so, but I, for one," says Ptolemy, "believe we do." Planting natives and inspiring others to do likewise is part of a hopeful way to confront the biodiversity crisis. Even if you can't plant some, please inspire others that you know to do this. Here's the Homegrown National Park poster and website address. There's a huge amount of information at homegrownnationalpark.org. It's on your website. There are videos and a lot of very, very useful information there. In 2000, my biology students and I planted butterfly garden around the flagpole near the main entrance to Grinnell, to Newton High School, where I taught biology for 34 years. Currently, I am mentoring a Newton High School biology teacher who replaced me. We're really good friends, and a student group to manage the garden. As a lead up to planting a native plant butterfly garden at Grinnell Friends Church, we held a month-long pollinator education series called A Celebration of New Life. In 2015, the congregation planted a 250 square foot native plant butterfly garden after a worship service. This is a picture of the garden in bloom. And later we added this sign, Caring for Creation, which is visible to the multitudes of people that pass by on Highway 146. This is our son, Paul, planting 2 rows of New Jersey tea. He lives not far from Effie, on the back border of his yard in Grinnell during May of last year. He's added shorter native wildflowers around the sides of his home and is preparing areas to plant beds of native wildflowers to replace portions of lawn grass to create a small portion of the home ground national park on his property. Actually, I'm working with two other families right now. They live on the outskirts of Grinnell, and they're going to put in some prairie plantings instead of mowing endless plots of boring green grass. A wonderful new conservation strategy called Prairie Strips, researched by Iowa State University, involves planting native grasses and wildflowers in contour strips on 10% of a crop field. Currently, farmers have implemented this strategy in 14 states. Prairie strips cover 14,000 acres and 140,000 acres of cropland. Actually, Michigan State University is now teaming with Iowa State University to spread this idea. The benefits of prairie strips included in their research at Iowa State: 42% less water runoff, 95% less soil leaves the field, and 89% less phosphorus and 84% less nitrogen left the field. Prairie strips are included in the latest Farm Bill. The lead scientist in this project, Lisa Sholey Moore, was awarded the MacArthur Genius Award. This conservation initiative that mimics natural processes can help to reduce the dead zone in the ocean and increase carbon sequestration in farm fields. I don't need to say anything. Actually, you can do something about this problem. And this is a grassroots effort. Fortunately, there are some government programs that can help people to do this. This dystopian, in other words, really, really bad future portrayed in Dr. Seuss's The Lorax, when native plants disappear, is analogous to our current dilemma. The Onceler's plea to plant the truffula seed for a better tomorrow is instructive. Planting butterfly gardens, prairies, wetlands, savannas, woodlands, and other native habitats can reverse the rapid decline in biodiversity and help to combat climate change. Ordinary folks like you and I must help to create a world where our descendants can thrive. Yes, then the Lorax and all of his friends can come back, if we all plant natives or spread the urgency of this endeavor to others. This is one of my favorite quotes. Actually, a good friend gave it to me, and I really like it. Those who dream by night in the dusty recesses of their minds wake in the day and find all is vanity. But the dreamers of the day are dangerous people. for they act their dream with open eyes to make it possible. T.E. Lawrence. People can make a difference and have a huge impact on the world around them. And you can be some of those people. Actually, Keith Briggs gave me a card with that on it. I'm guessing 20 years ago, and I still have the card. So, yeah. If you want me to speak to a service club, a church, school, garden club, conservation group, or other community organization, you can contact. That information's on the handout. And I just have given, I'll use the pointer. Hopefully I'll do it right. Let's see. I think. No. Got to turn it over. Yeah, this is the presentation you've just heard. Actually, next week I'll do, at the bucket course here, I'll do the Green Yard Makeover, which gives more specific information. It's not my inspirational talk, it's my how-to talk about how to do this kind of thing. And you'll get another handout about that at that time. Thank you.
I have a question. Hello. Don't leave yet, please.
I
Could you go back in your slides to where it shows the prairie strips and the corn and show the roots of the native plant? Just point that out. There. No, the drawing. It's on the right. Look how deep those roots are. That's why it holds the soil.
Okay, I think we'll take our 10-minute break, and we'll do all the questions if you have any at the end of Effie's part of the presentation. So 10 minutes. Eat, and now let's listen to what Effie Hall has to tell us.
Thank you, Joanne. Thank you all for being here. Is this volume okay? Okay. And I want to thank Jim for inviting me to be part of his biodiversity talk. That gave me occasion to look back at what I had done, and it's been like 7 years doing this, and how our own garden evolved through time. So you'd say I am one of the people that heeded Jim's call, which actually, looking back, is very unlike me to have done it, because I'll tell you why. Well, I grew up in Manila, Philippines. I've always considered myself a city girl, millions of people in Manila. My parents were always working. My mother was a history professor, and my father was day city editor of a newspaper. And as I said, they were always working, and gardening was never part of our life. But I do remember at home, we had a banana tree in the back, and a coconut tree, and a palm tree in front, and we had bougainvilleas, and a plant that we called gumamela, which I just looked up recently is really a hibiscus. And so we did have plants around the house, and I remember bushes called San Francisco, very colorful bushes. But someone else took care of the garden. My very own experience in gardening goes back to 1990 when we lived in Bettendorf. And I planted tomato plants, green pepper, and cucumber. And for the front, petunias and geraniums just to add color. And they all did well, and all I did was water the plants, and I would ascribe that to the good Iowa soil. So in 2012, I retired from Grinnell College, and I had time on my hands. Well, that freed up a lot sometime, and I wondered what hobbies I might pick up. And for some of you who know me, I did pick up knitting. But I had some experience in knitting because I learned that way back in grade school. But gardening was very minimal. So in 2014, I took Jim's class. Okay. So designing your own pollinator and butterfly garden, which he said that he does give at the Iowa Valley Community College. And I included this slide because one of the exercises was to draw your, your yard. And he gave us some confettis and said, plot where you might want to put some native plants. I included this because I wanted you to see that at that time our yard was pretty much typical of Grinnell yards or Grinnell or yards around the country. Bushes around the house, and those round things are trees. Jim's class, and he referred to Douglas Talamy in his talk just this morning. He is a main proponent of homegrown national park. And something that he said has stuck in my mind. He said that 71% of the lower 48 states is privately owned. Just think about that. 71% of land in the lower 48 is privately owned. If we planted native on 50% of this private land, we could restore biodiversity. He said that even moderate success could collectively restore some semblance of ecosystem function to more than 20 million acres of what is now ecological wasteland. So that idea kind of stuck in my head. And the more important thing is, he said, we could do this one person at a time. So, as I said, that idea stuck in my head. It wasn't until 3 years later that I decided, but maybe I could start a pollinator garden. That was in 2017, because as you know, if you're newly retired, there are so many other things that you'd like to do. So finally, in 2017, I thought I'd do this. So before I go into that, let me just cite some things along the way. From Jim's class, I learned of Prairie Moon as a provider for native plants, and in the ensuing years, I learned about Prairie Nursery. And these are two outfits. There may be more, but these are the two that I've dealt with. You can buy pre-planned garden kits, and I myself have tried the butterfly and hummingbird garden, the classic tall grass prairie garden, and you could buy them in 32 plant kits or 16 plant kit or 3 packs, bare root or seeds. Another tool that I use in planting our pollinator garden is this book, and I think I learned about it from the Des Moines Register, the Midwestern Native Garden, and its value is this. It gives you the native plant, and then it gives you a whole bunch of non-native alternatives. And so I just listed some that I had known personally. But one thing I concluded after having planted those some native alternatives, that actually it's not exactly alike. I mean, these are different plants, so they won't look exactly alike, but it could carry, the color, for example. It could give you the color that you would want. The other tool that I had used in the course of this project is an app called Picture This, which is a plant identifier. I didn't learn about this until I took a Master Gardener class, which I'll talk about later. And the value of this to me is, it has with your camera, you download it on your phone, and you could point your camera to a plant, and it will tell you the name of the plant, scientific name, describe it, where you can find it, and if the plant isn't doing very well, it will even diagnose it for you. So to me, this was a very valuable tool, because even when I decided to do this, I didn't really know how native plants look like, what they were, and also I didn't know the non-native plants other than what, petunias and geraniums. So it was very helpful for me, and I remember going around town, and the Episcopalian Church has native plantings. I gone there and just took pictures of different plants just to familiarize myself with what native plants are. And at the United Methodist Church, it's very well landscaped, and in that case, it familiarized me with non-native plants. So anyway, so at this point now, we know what the problem is, the need for biodiversity and to help pollinators and insects grow. And a partial solution is now being advanced by Doug Talamay, which is the notion of a homegrown national park. So although I had known about the Prairie Nursery, I didn't really buy from them at the beginning. I pretty much stuck locally. The first question is, where should we do this? So my husband was in charge of the yard, and so we talked about where I might do this, and so we decided that I could do it on the east side of the house. And the good thing about the east side of the house is it gets at least 6 hours of sunshine every day. As I said, I wanted to confine where would I get the native plants? At that time, the garden club, I think, had a plant sale, and I went over there, and my first purchase were switchgrass. So I got 3 of them, and I put them right smack in the middle of that area. This is a recent photo. What we had there at that time were like 3 Stella de Oro lilies and 3 barberry bushes on the right side. So that's all I did that first year, and watched the switchgrass grow. The second year, I decided I would now do the pre-planned kit. When you order a pre-planned garden kit, they actually send you a suggested layout. And this is what came with the layout for a butterfly. I think it's the classic, no, it's the butterfly and hummingbird garden kit. The size this is for a 6 by 12, and the area we had was, not exactly the same size, but I plotted how tall they were going to be. But although in the end I didn't really use any of this suggestion, we just planted them where. So the next year, that's one thing about gardening. You don't actually see the product till about almost a year later, because you got to watch the plants grow. So the next year, I discovered about a third of the plants didn't make it through winter. So I bought another set, and I stuck them in the same place. So as a result of these 2 years planting, that small area by this east side of the house was pretty much filled. And I'll show you 2 pictures of that area. One is, this is the left side, and the switchgrass that I talked about earlier is this. From this 2-year experience with the 2 sets of pre-planned kits, 2 plants, I'm pointing out 2 plants because they really gave me a lot of satisfaction seeing them for the first time, because I didn't even know they existed, but they were so pretty. One is the Ohio spiderwort, and Jim mentioned that earlier. By the time I took this picture, they had pretty much dried up, but that's how they look. Blue and small, and I noticed that in the middle of the day, they will close up to protect themselves from the sun. I assume that was the reason, because the following morning they'll be open again. And it was such a pleasure to see the Ohio spiderwort. That's our bedroom, and so it would greet me in the morning. The other one that I remember from this is the royal catchfly, and this was planted right outside our TV room. And so when we were watching TV, we could see it, beautiful red flowers, And hummingbirds love this plant. And they'd come around and, you could see the fluttering their wings and trying to drink in the nectar. And one good thing about the royal catchfly is that they don't flap around. They're pretty much straight and erect. I included the scientific names of these two plants because as I looked for, when I'd go to a nursery, I'd see a plant. Well, this is what I concluded what was happening. Nurseries would do something with a plant and they would add on a third name. And so when I'd go to a nursery, there'd be a third name, and it kind of confused me. And I realized later on that when that occurs, it's a cultivar or a nativar, and that the cultivar may or may not do exactly what the native plant, what you expect the native plant to do. So that was just some information along the way that I picked up. Essentially, looking back at this process, it's been trial and error, incremental, and picking tidbits of knowledge as I talk to people. So now the third year, we built a deck in the back of the house. And so I thought maybe I'd plant some native plants around the deck. In the meantime, I'd been listening to webinars, webinars that will come my way. And one from an outfit called Monarch Gardens, which is located in Nebraska. I thought I would plant some native plants along the east side of the deck. And this one webinar I saw suggested this kind of combination, so I purchased those plants and planted them. But then I realized even if you have the layout and even if you try to do it, sometimes it doesn't come out completely like the layout. But out of this experience, I discovered the butterfly weed, which is a beautiful orange flower. On the other side of the deck, I decided I wanted to do the classic tall grass prairie garden. This is how it looked when it was grown. Beautiful, I think that's black-eyed Susan and coneflowers. But there were several things I realized about native, at least tall, native grasses and native plants, that if you plant it too close to a sidewalk or a walkway, they'd flap over and it would get in the way of people walking. And if on the other side, if you plant it too close to the lawn, it makes it hard for the person who's cutting the lawn, which is my husband, of course. So at this point, early on, okay, what have I learned? I've been learning what native plants look like. I learned that plants die. Well, this is, to me, kind of an important lesson because at the beginning I thought, well, native plants, I mean, we could just plant them, and since they're native, they must be able to survive on their own. Well, not really, because they still need care. Native plants and native grass can give a shrubbery effect, and I already mentioned the flappy nature of some tall native plants. So I got it in my head that maybe I could mix up some native and non-native plants in this project. In 2019, I enrolled at the Iowa Master Gardeners program provided by Iowa State University. This is a statewide program, and I'm sure you know about it. It encourages people to be gardeners, essentially. It is a semester long. You meet once a week. From this experience, one of the exercises was visit to the Poweshiek County Fairgrounds, and because there were garden plots that were being maintained by master gardeners. And so, armed with my Picture This app, which I talked about earlier, I noted what non-native plants I liked. The other two aspects of the Master Gardener's program that I wanted to mention is to maintain it, you have to earn 10 credits, 10 hours of continuing education a year, and 20 hours of volunteer work. I did my volunteer work at the Giving Garden, specifically the Marvin Garden, and so I thought that was going to give me my vegetable fix. And I was going to concentrate on my native garden for the flowers. The continuing education, I'll relate that to what happened the next year, which was 2020, and two events. Who can forget 2020? Two events, yeah, two events kind of changed the course of our native garden. One was COVID, and the impact of that on me personally was, remember, the continuing education that we had to take. And since people cannot gather, all these courses that are possible for me to take for continuing education were offered via webinars or Zoom. And so this was in January, February, and so I had the luxury of being at home and be able to watch webinars or join via Zoom from courses from even as far as Penn State Extension Service and Illinois State Extension Service, and of course the Iowa State Extension Service. And I took several of those courses were about native plants. The other thing is the derecho. And like many Grinnellians, we lost some trees in the back. This was a large maple tree that was about 80 feet tall, and it had a big canopy that made the backyard a little bit shady. So we lost that. And in the other picture is in the front. There were some big branches from our neighbor's yard that came down. Our son came and helped, and he was able to cut down some of that maple tree. But even after 3 days of work, there was still a huge part of the tree still up. We eventually had to hire a tree service. So because of the derecho, we lost essentially, we lost 3 trees, and since we had a tree service, we had 5 other trees that were cut down. So out of this, I gained a new palette. This is essentially now the front. We made a flower bed out of the front, and in the back, the center part of that in the back was where that huge maple was. So in the back then, we were able to make one flower bed, over here another flower bed, and over there another flower bed. There was a reason also for creating these flower beds. It lessened the area for mowing. By this time now, I had some knowledge of what native plants look like and some knowledge of what some non-native plants look like that I personally thought, that I personally liked. But I knew this was a big job, and I knew I couldn't do it by myself. So I asked our neighbor, Ralph Iberg, who might be able to help me, and he pointed me to Tommy Hexter. And by chance, Tommy Hexter enrolled in the same Iowa Master Gardener's class program that I was in. So I asked him if he could help me. The first year, he brought some friends to help. He said, of course. He helped me, and then for the next 2 years, he and his dad helped me out with the native garden. And this was just excellent because now I got some muscles and the experience that they have in gardening themselves. And so from, I learned one landscaping hint, or I don't know if it's a principle, a suggestion is you need to have some edging. So the edging that I put were lamb's ear, because they were available at James Greenhouse that was open at that time. Salvias are ubiquitous. You can see them in any nursery. And from my experience at Marvin Garden, I realized that zinnias and marigolds, they're easy to grow. And they are just gorgeous and extends, and the flowers extend way into the fall. So in the middle part are some zinnias and marigolds. And you don't see it here. Over here, the edging that I used on the other side were catmin. And because I found them at Jordan Scheibel, remember he started selling some native plants, so I got some catmin from him. And over here, at that time we still have the locust tree. We had that eventually removed. I did have some lilies from the other part of the yard moved here, and some hostas. Another view of the front yard. And zinnias, by the way, I'd like to say monarch butterflies love them. Here's another view of the front yard. A red bee balm in the background are coreopsis. I discovered that coreopsis are self-seed, and because they do that, they now are occupying more space than I really would want. The picture on the right, I wanted to include that because although they are non-native, there's only one native plant there, and that's the Ohio spiderwort over there. Somebody gave me some iris bulbs, or like 2-3 years before this picture was taken. I put some there, and the salvias. And here, I don't think you can see it. It's a prairie drop seed. What else is in there? But anyway, to me, the combination was kind of pretty. So another shot, the east side of the house where I had originally planted those 2 sets of pre-planned garden kits that I got. Remember, by this point, we were moving things around, so I moved the native plants to the front. Those irises that someone gave me really proved to me what gardeners know. Perennials, the first year they sleep, the second year they creep, and the third year they leap. And the irises really leapt that third year. It was very satisfying to me to see that. And the picture on the right, by this time I was also planting herbs on the east side of the house. That is dillweed that someone had given me. Dorothy had given that to me. So most of the native plants are in the back of the house. Remember that, first of all, if I mentioned the switchgrass, I noticed that the switchgrass likes to follow the sun. So when it was in the east side of the house, it would start doing that. And then once the sun got to the other side, it couldn't follow it anymore because the sun was behind the house. So I transferred them in the middle here, and now they are free. The classic tall grass, prairie and tall native plants, which was quite confined in the west side of the deck. We moved them here, and now it has a much bigger area to grow. And on the other side, I intend this to be for medium height native plants. This is a closer view of that tall prairie grass area. The yellow, these are showy goldenrods, and bees and bumblebees really love them. And there's the most variety of native plants in our yard is in this part. Here's another view of the same tall prairie area. And I included the winter shot because I learned along the way that it's best not to cut them because in the winter the insects and caterpillars and other insects seeks shelter there, and birds eat the seeds that might still be there. Um, I just took this shot on the left recently to show that those switchgrass, even if it's towards the end of the season, they're still pretty to look at. And also, I want to call your attention. We have pine trees in the back there, and there's an area called, we call the way back, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. This is feather grass, which is not native, but I planted it there because I like them, and I put some cornflowers. And see, here are some of the flowers that are in the yard. And so the thing I get out of it is seeing really these different flowers. Here is an example of combining native and non-native. We went to Pella once, and I saw that homeowners there have tulips planted sometimes on the right of way or sometimes in the front yard, and they were just in a row. So I said, I'd like to do that. And so I discovered that you call that trench planting. So one fall, I dug a trench in front of the flagpole and planted 300 bulbs. And now behind are some native plants, and this is how it looks later on in the season. So the idea is to have flowers, throughout the season. Here's the trench planting, digging that I did. I don't recommend it. It was difficult, I want to say. And the tulips. The only thing that we have in the yard that is original are the hostas on the west side, which is sunny. And the only thing we've done with the hostas is divide them when the time came. I wanted to include this because, again, non-native, but the hibiscus, I tried planting that for 3 years in a row. Finally, the third year, they survived the winter. And the picture on the right is a tiger lily with native plants in the back. So lessons I've learned that are familiar to gardeners here. It's nice to mass species, and if you do that, shoot for an even number, 3, 5, 7. Different heights, shorter plants in front, medium height in the middle, and tall in the back. Watch out for invasive species. If the literature says they are invasive, they will be invasive. Watch out for overcrowding because, well, it speaks for itself what overcrowding would do to the garden. And of course, the big lesson for me, a garden is always a work in progress. My future plans, I'd like to plant native plants in my daughter's house in Highland Park, Illinois, which is north of Chicago. This year, I'd like to observe what happens to the different flower beds that I have and rethink the areas. Ground cover. I've been on a mission to plant ground cover where there are no plants so that maybe eventually I'll avoid weeding and mulching. I'm not at that point yet. And I'd like to learn to plant from seeds because I pointed out to you the way back, which is an area between our yard and that's on 4th Avenue and the yard of the house on the 5th Avenue. We discovered that an alley was supposed to go in that between those two sets of houses, but the owners then decided they didn't want an alley, so they purchased the land. And so we have a big area there with just grass. But I want to do that from seed because it's less expensive that way. What do I get out of it? Having cut flowers for the house, seeing nature, and I hope you can see this. This was just something that we happened to see. This is a hummingbird trying to, trying to get the nectar, and of course, butterflies. The first year I did this, we just had a few butterflies come, but through the years, there's more and more. And last year was the most we've had. And this is a monarch butterfly enjoying a prairie blazing star. Yeah. So it really has been a pleasure to do this, to heed the Jim and saying we could do this one person at a time, and it's given me a lot of pleasure. Thank you so much for listening to my creating a native garden. So
Does anybody have any questions for either one?
This is for Jim. How often do you do burns, and how often do you do burns in your savanna area?
Typically, right now we're doing them about every 3 years. But one thing about native plantings, larger native plantings and prairie plantings, is to begin with, we did it almost every year until we got things established and got rid of the weeds and so on. One thing I would like to say about my talk next week is I'll show ideas about how to integrate this with a vegetable garden in a yard so that we take a holistic approach to the whole thing of replacing lawn with some things that help people and also that help the rest of life on this planet.
I was wondering if you had found a good native ground cover. Ground covers always make me nervous because I'm afraid if they creep and spread, if it's not something native, I don't want to have to deal with an invasive problem later. But I was wondering if you had a native plant that you'd found that was a good ground cover.
at this point, not really, but I've been watching what those two outlets, that Prairie Moon and Prairie Nursery, what they would suggest as ground cover. But it seemed like they would be too tall, and I haven't gone that way yet.
I'm trying to think of some off the top of my head, and right now the names are escaping me, but yeah, there are a number of things that you can use. One thing that I'll talk about next week, with butterfly gardens and with native plants, unlike a lot of the non-natives, all this stuff is pollinated, so it goes to seed. And if you just leave it alone and don't deadhead them, you end up with something that doesn't look like a garden anymore, like a flower garden. And so, like at Grinnell Friends Church and also at over at Newton High School, I go in several times a year as things bloom before they go to seed and deadhead them. And it's also been an interesting experience. The garden at Newton High School is a very public garden. It's at the entrance to the high school around the flagpole. And for a while, we had a new superintendent, he's gone now, who came in and he said, "Got to cut this thing down. This is too tall." So we did, and then I would go in June and cut back the plants. They would go ahead and bloom, and that seemed to pacify him. And so I did it. But in a very public setting, I tend to encourage people to plant natives that are like 2 foot or shorter rather than the tall stuff. I planted some big blue stem in the garden in front of the high school, and I wouldn't have done that again. I would have done some of the shorter grasses. I did some, but there's some side oats in there. But as Effie said, it is a learning experience. I've been at this, planted my first butterfly garden in the mid-1970s. I'm still learning. I know a lot more than I did then, but Effie? Or are there other questions?
Thank you. How do you respond to potential fire hazards? And these aren't necessarily controlled ones, especially in a residential district, or residential area. The practicality of that I sometimes question.
Have some mowed lawn around it. And if you're concerned about it in the fall, you can mow it. I usually don't do anything until spring because I like to leave some stalks for the pollinators to inhabit. But you know that during the growing season that isn't a concern, but in the winter, if you're concerned about fire hazard, mow it. You know, that's a pretty simple solution.
For several years. Is this working? Okay. So in the fall, for years, I'd volunteer at Sarah to go out and do controlled burns. And it was my understanding that the reason for that is because that's the natural way of nature to control what's growing there and to prepare the ground for the next year, and the ashes are good fertilizer. So it was my intention to do a controlled burn, and it's easy because there's small areas, and I do have a hose that can reach throughout there. But Effie says no because it's pretty in the summer, or during the winter it's pretty with the snow. So now we've just got a bunch of stuff that's almost on the ground. Should I cut it down? Should I just leave it and it'll, add nourishment to the soil, or what would you suggest we do?
Actually, you're going to run a lawnmower over it and mulch it. That's one solution. And I don't know how, I don't live in Grinnell proper, so I don't know how fussy they are about somebody lighting a fire. They're probably pretty fussy about that. And so in cities, you mow it, rake off the residue, and that's what I'm doing out at the church garden, at the Grinnell Friends Church Garden. In a few weeks, I'll be out there with a weed cutter, and I'll rake it off, and that works just fine because it lets the heat gets to the soil, and it's just basically what you're doing when you burn. Although burning is more effective, but it works.
We have a small native prairie in our backyard, and we do burn it. We let the fire department know. It's surrounded by grass. It's very controlled. Takes 10 minutes to do. So you just let the fire department know. You can register it actually that you have native prairie, and then just let them know. So if they get a frantic phone call from a neighbor or something, they know what's going on.
We want to thank Effie and Jim for being here today and sharing your experiences in gardening, creating gardens using native plants, and stressing the importance of restoring and protecting native habitats. We look forward to seeing all of you next Wednesday, March 20, when Jim returns with part 2 of his course, which is entitled The Green Yard Makeover. He will explain the many benefits of integrating native plants in your yard and describe how to do it right. See you next week. And remember to unsilence your cell phones. Thank you.